exclusively on Secular Media Network. This is the Atheist Manifesto.
Hello and welcome to the Atheist Manifesto, your source for news, commentary, discussion, and debate at the intersection of the atheist movement and the LGBT rights movement. I am your host, Callie Wright, joined by my co-host, Ari Stillman. What's up, Ari?
Happy real 100th episode, hopefully this time.
Right. And this is, I think this is a cool episode to be doing for what actually turned out to be our 100th episode. Last week I had equipment issues, basically. We'll just boil it down to that. It's a little more complicated than that. So yeah.
Callie, tell us the entire story. Tell us everything that went wrong in excruciating detail. We need to know.
I'm not going to do that. That's okay. So, anybody who follows the atheist Patheos channel, or I guess the non-religious Patheos channel now, I have some feelings about that whole thing, but that's a different subject.
Feelings, huh?
Yeah, I got some feels. It's kind of settled down now, but there was a little bit of a dust up over the subject of anti-theism. And Martin Hughes at the Barrier Breaker blog had posted a post saying why I am not an anti-theist anymore. I don't know if that's the exact title, but that was the gist of it. And basically explaining why he couldn't bring himself to be an anti-theist anymore. And this is after a long history of, posts and positions saying, why anti-theism is important, why people should be anti-theists, and why that is the logically defensible position. And so there were lots of responses from all over the Patheos kingdom about that subject, and mine was one of them. And I want to be clear that I invited Martin on to defend his position, and he opted to not join us. So I don't want to exactly say that like he's fair game. We can just beat up on him when he's not here to defend himself. But he was given the opportunity and refused. So I think it's at least fair game to comment and respond to some of the things that he said. So that's probably going to happen here. My own position, I'll just kind of stake it out right now, is that philosophically and intellectually, I think it would be dishonest for me not to call myself an anti-theist because I am anti-religion. I think religion is a net harm in the world, and I think that fighting religious privilege and religious influence is a noble end unto itself. In practice, though, I'm not sure that anyone who looked at my activism would necessarily see that, because I've dealt with enough atheists in the movement, or maybe not the organized atheist movement, but I guess more the community than the movement specifically. People who have gleefully called for the culling of disabled people, or, argued strenuously against my right to use public restrooms, or argued against gay marriage, or who are proudly racist. All of these problems, I'm not sure those problems are unique to religion, and I don't know that getting rid of religion in and of itself would be a solution to these problems. So I guess my question more is whether or not that should be our directed and focused effort. Obviously, philosophically, I believe one way, but when it comes to my activism and what I choose to do, I'm not sure that it makes sense for me to put all of my effort, or a significant portion of my effort, into religion specifically, because those problems obviously exist outside of religion as well. And at this point, I'll go ahead and bring on the guests that we do have, other Patheos bloggers from the Miracle Girl blog. Stehpanie Savage, welcome.
Hi. Thank you for having me.
And from the Danthropology blog, Dan Arel.
Hi, thank you for having me. Sorry, I was muted there for a second. My kid decided to play some music in the background, so I'm like running to the other room.
Right. So I think the thing that makes sense probably to do first is to sort of nail down what we're talking about when we say anti-theism, because in my mind, what I'm saying when I use the word anti-theism, what I'm talking about specifically is a philosophical position that religion is bad and worth fighting, and we would be better without. And it's more of the philosophical position. It doesn't necessarily describe the practical ways which we apply that philosophy, but just that sort of position and that belief itself. Stehpanie, Dan, would you agree with that? Would you disagree with that?
I think that's pretty fair. It's also a self-identity, I think, in part. I agree with everything you said, but I personally don't identify as an anti-theist, but I'm not pro-theist either. And I'm more focused on fighting the harms of religion, and I actually don't care if people want to believe. It's bullshit, but you want to believe it, go ahead, go to it, and good luck. But stay out of politics and the schools, and don't tell people where they can pee. Don't try to put bronze age for superstitions in the schools. Okay, you can believe it if you want, but stay out of my way. But I really don't care if people want to believe or not. I think it's bullshit, of course. I think a lot of my views are molded by the fact that I was raised with that religion. My impression is, and that it's might be wrong, but my impression is that people who are deconverts, which I think are most atheists, are much more anti-religion than people raised without religion, but there aren't that many of us.
Yeah, I'd say that's probably accurate.
Yeah, I'd agree with that statement. And I think, too, that anti-theism is it's passive in a sense, because it's only non-passive. It's only active if you want it to be. But I think you can be a person that thinks the world would be better off if people lost religious belief, but not really make great efforts to do that, and still really call yourself an anti-theist, because you see religion as an overall harm that even the most benign believer would probably be better off if they gave up belief, because holding on to certain beliefs that just don't have any evidence behind them, have no basis in reality, and then that can sometimes shape other decisions people make, and they can be minuscule, but once you start okaying the idea that, I don't have to have evidence that this is true to believe it, like, where do you go from there? Is that the next step to, oh my God, I have cancer, I've heard chemo's bad, I'm going to try eating orange peels?
That makes sense. Ari, I'm curious where you come down on this.
Yeah, I agree with what's been said. I totally agree with Stephanie's approach as to which of the two prongs of the problem is the most important to be tackling right now, which is the direct harms that religion is doing to our society, rather than the more passive kind of decay of critical thinking skills that religion can promote in our society. I guess I would go with Dan in that I do call myself an anti-theist, even though I favor the approach of tackling the more severe problem at the moment, because I do, again, what Kelly was saying, it's kind of more of a philosophical position. I do see religion as being harmful inherently, and of course, getting rid of religion isn't going to solve all the problems in the world, and there's still going to be problems with logic and reason in non-religious areas as well. But I think the most important thing to focus on at the moment is, again, the direct harms that religion is doing right now. And once we solve that more pressing problem, hopefully, I think it's probably going to be quite a while, far outside of my lifetime, before that happens. But then I think would be a good time for people to start tackling the more base problems.
Yeah, I think part of the point that I made in my post was that when it comes to religion and the subject of religion, that my activism is secular. My activism is not atheist or anti-theist necessarily, because I think in a lot of ways those questions sometimes tend to be more academic than practical, and that if we can achieve a perfectly secular society where religion has no influence, I really don't care what people believe. But the problem is that people believe, because their religions tell them, that, secularism is heresy and that secularism is a thing to be fought. So, I guess my question is, can we really separate the two? Because, I don't see how we're going to convince, someone who is 100% convinced that secularism is evil, that we are going to convince that person to accept a secular society without undermining their underlying belief.
Yeah. Oh, the thing about monotheistic religion is that it's very dualistic. God told us this is the truth, and therefore, if you say something different, you're evil or you're against God. It promotes a sort of a brain block to keep out competing thoughts. So it does intend to promote the kind of behavior like the religious right, which is what my main focus is, fighting the religious right. It promotes the kind of thinking that does tend to cause a lot of cultural harm. But in his post, he was talking a lot about personal harms and how he was talking more psychologically, how it's important for people as a sort of a security blanket, and it's we're talking about competing harms in this case.
Yeah, and I guess what I'm kind of trying to figure out, because this is something that I honestly wrestle with. I'm not asking this question to be a devil's advocate. So the question is, which problem is bigger? Which problem deserves more of our effort, right? Do we put a bunch of our time and effort into undermining people's theistic beliefs and therefore undermine the basic reasons that they fight against secularism in the first place, right? So, do we fight that underlying belief, or do we take it head on and say, what you believe is what you can believe, but I'm going to force you out of the legislature? I guess there's two questions there. One is, which is more of a problem? And two is, which is more likely to be successful? Like, which of these equations is more likely to get us closer to our goal? Dan, do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think we have to do them both simultaneously, really, because we have to take on legislation first, I think, because that's the real impact it's going to have immediately. So by taking religion out of politics, that's step one, because no matter what awful thing someone believes, if they don't have influence on the law, then they're impotent. They can't do anything about it. So they can think, you can't use this bathroom, but then the law says, oh, well, yes, they can. Well, then they can just stand there and stomp their little feet and be upset. But at the same time, our message needs to be get them out, but also picking apart why they believe that. Because, and I think we use this a lot in debates that we have, is that we're not always debating that person. It's the people watching. And so if we take on someone head on and say, you have no right to legislate for your religious belief, and then chip away at what they believe and why it's wrong, other people watching that may not share their extreme level of faith, but share in some of it, might start to think, oh, wow, like I never thought of it that way. And that undermines that person's faith. And we can start, that starts to spread on its own to the eventual point where if we're successful in that, religion, we don't have to stomp it out forcefully. We're just going to reason people out of it. It's going to get to the point where we've laid so many seeds to questioning faith that people just aren't going to grow up with it. And so while we're stopping awful legislation, we're planting those seeds of doubt at the same time that leads towards the eradication of religion, or at least to the point where it's pushed back so far that it just doesn't become a part of people's everyday thinking in life. And I think that's the first step to that goal.
And Stehpanie?
I think that personally it is better for people not to believe in bullshit. And if I were discussing it with these issues in person, I would tell them the logical foundations. But theism is inculcated from the earliest years, and you're not going to eradicate it. And most people, they have to, the doubts have to grow and grow until they eventually decide, I don't believe in this anymore. But I do think, obviously, the first thing we have to do is, the most important thing is the politics. And that's the most doable. And we can try to reason with people, but a lot of studies have shown that the more you try to reason with people, the more they tend to block out what you say. So it can be counterproductive to give facts even. People just don't believe it. We've seen that a lot in the last election.
Part of the argument seemed to be that people go through hard times, some people need religion, and we shouldn't be interested in taking that away from them. And I think on the surface, that sounds kind of like a humanistic argument on the the very surface level.
Yes, that was
saying,
my first take.
Yeah, it helps people, so let's not take this thing away that helps people. But if you dig down just below the surface, it does become sort of patronizing. Well, I've evolved past this, I don't need it. But looking down at you obviously do. So go ahead and do your thing.
Yeah, my first reaction was, it's very humanistic. And then the more I thought about it, my opinion started changing. And the other thing is that he talked about his reasons why his mom needs it, and she's got a lot of health problems. And I started thinking about my health problems, and I've been through a lot of shit. And I don't think it's egotistical to say, it does take a lot of strength to not need God when I've got a lot of fears about what might happen, my severe autoimmune disease, and there was a possible cancer risk. It's a really fucked up condition. It's called dermatomyositis, but I'm not going to get into that because it's complicated and not related to this. But he was basically saying that people who I don't criticize people for clinging to religion, as President Obama said before he was elected. But when they need it. But it's not egotistical to say that I'm stronger for not needing it.
Yeah, I can agree with that. Where I start to bristle a little bit is I think to the people that I know in the queer and trans community who are religious, and I hear them saying things like, the fact that I knew God loved me is the only reason that I didn't commit suicide. And I'm thinking to myself,
or that God made them that way for a reason, to make them stronger and put them through, whatever trials to make them a stronger person.
Right. So how do we respond to that? You know what I mean? Because obviously I know what my I know what my intellectual response is that, when people say things like that, I want to look at them and be like, no, you got you through that. Whatever strength you have, whatever support you have, you got you through that. But if the entire foundation of this person's life is based on this, is it really a net good to take that away from them? Especially when we may not necessarily be able to provide them with a replacement.
Well,
yeah.
I think they need to take it away from themselves. And that's the critical difference here is that, so my grandmother lost 2 children very young. This is back in the 60s or so. She lost one within months of birth and one at 10 or 11 years old. And she told me, without God, I never, ever would have made it through that. I'm not strong enough to handle that, but God helped me through it. And just like you were saying, I had to tell her, no, you got through that on your own. And you should feel proud that you're strong enough to get over that. Don't, demean yourself and say, I'm not a strong person, but God got me through it. And I think that kind of thought process carries weight into other things. So now she looks at herself as a not strong person. She can't take on those heavy burdens. She can't deal with life's problems because she's not strong enough. That's how she views herself. And I think that's a terrible way for a person to view themselves. And so she still believes in God. She still believes that she isn't strong enough. But I don't think I did any harm by telling her, no, I think you're a strong, powerful person. I think you did this.
Telling her that, no. But I'm curious. I mean, what if, and obviously we're speaking hypothetically here, but I mean, what if she had believed you? Or what if, I said that to a person, in a support group or something along those lines, and they really started to think, and they really started to, because obviously if you don't have God, what you have left, generally speaking, are people. And, not everyone has a big group of loving, supportive people in their life to fall back on. So I guess that's kind of where I'm going. And maybe this is maybe a more general thing that might be a little off topic, but I keep thinking to myself about, we talk like one of the strengths of religion, in its, hold on people and its pervasiveness is the community that it provides for people. And I don't know that it's necessarily easy for a person to find that somewhere else. So what I struggle with it, and I don't claim to have the answer to this question because I can see a lot of different angles to it, but taking that away from a person without knowing that they have another soft place to land. I mean, if we do say that to a person and they're convinced by it, and that argument is convincing to them, have we actually done that person good, a net good?
Sounds close to what Martin said, and not that far from it anyway.
I think so, though. I think it does. I think if my in the situation of my grandmother, if she had said, "Wow, you're right," I think that in that situation, it may have built her up. Now, I think I would think differently, as in your stating, if I was in front of a transgender person who said, "I almost killed myself, but God talked me out of it." I think at that moment I wouldn't say, "Oh no, he did not."
Right.
And then I would. So I think you do have to gauge your situation, and I think that's just common sense with everything. If someone's battling with cancer and they're literally stage 5, I don't know the stages very well, but they're
stage 4 terminal. Is the worst one.
Yeah. So you're terminal. You're not. They're not going to make it, and they know they're not going to make it. At that point, when they say, "I'm just looking forward to heaven," you don't say, "Oh, I got news for you."
Right.
Like, you don't take that from, if a child is dying, you gauge those situations when it's appropriate to build someone up, because I don't think you're taking something away when you say, "No, you're the strong one." You're building them up, but we also have to be aware of who this person is. And if we don't know their backstory, we don't know anything about them, then we have to use our common sense and be careful in our approach. Because we can't just run around saying there's no God to everybody, when there might be someone who's desperately grasping on that because their life may end if they lost that faith.
There are multiple ways of going about this. It's not necessarily a black or white thing. Like you were saying, gauge your situation. You could be saying essentially the same message in, two rather different tones. If somebody, for example, your example about a trans person who is religious, who needs God in order to feel like they can be safe in the world, the way to go about that isn't to say, "Oh, your silly beliefs, aren't you precious with your little outdated Bible," or anything like that. The way to say that, and you could still get the same point across, is to say, "Well, I don't really believe in religion, and I think that was you all along, and I'm glad that you have a way to feel happy and to feel safe. But from my perspective, I think that you're the strong person." Those are, they're essentially getting across the same message that, this religion probably didn't have anything to do with it, or at least the God that you believe in didn't have anything to do with this. It was, your inner strength that had to do with it. But, it's coming at it from a way of compassion versus a way of scorn and ridicule.
Not being a dick.
Yeah.
Exactly.
In other words.
That old maxim.
Yeah. The one of the struggles that I always have when we're talking about these kinds of things, like I think about the people, and again, this is like, it's almost like the hashtag not all religious people argument. But so one of the questions that I posed in my post is that, like, I think it's probably safe to say that the vast majority of religious people are not necessarily the kind of religious people who are actually interested in legislating their beliefs on others. It's the vocal minority that happen to be in power, because, you know, the people who are more passive are voting on things like the economy, and they don't pay attention to things like reproductive rights or LGBT rights and those kinds of things. So I guess, and I guess I've said this before, but I'm curious if, you know, that in itself is a big enough problem to be like, okay, this is my fight. You know, and obviously, I mean, we can do more than one thing at any given time. I get that. I'm not, you know, like concern trolling someone. But I think about the people in marginalized communities who are people of faith of one kind or another, and who, aside from their religious beliefs, we probably wouldn't disagree on literally anything, aside from the fact that they maybe aren't a Star Trek fan.
The most important thing.
And I
would fully agree with them there.
Fair enough. well then let's talk about people who don't like kale. But I think to myself, if I'm doing activism work with those people, is it even worth me having the conversation? Because at that point, aren't our differences really academic? And again, like I said, I definitely don't want to say like, well, we have to pick this one thing and do it. But I'm just wondering. I mean, is there any point where it comes time where it's worth having that conversation and saying like, gosh, you know, like in this hypothetical world where, you know, no one's oppressed anymore, we've achieved perfect secularism and we've achieved perfect social justice. You know, I mean, is it then worth it to turn around and be like, hey, you know what? So like this whole God thing, not a thing for me. Can we have a talk about that? Like, is that a conversation even worth having at that point? Does it matter to have that conversation?
I'm one to think that liberals need to make common cause with our allies, and so do atheists. And even if those allies do believe in Bronze Age superstitions, if they believe politically and their basic goals are simpatico with ours, we need to make common cause with them, because there aren't enough atheists to make a real splash. So we can't be pushing them away. We need to say, come on board. And yes, we disagree with us about this stuff, but we agree about these general goals.
Dan?
I also think we have to look at it from the idea of, it's not necessarily that, you know, we work with these groups and then we say, look, we have to have a talk. I think in a sense, and at least for me in my anti-theism and the way I approach it, is I'm not looking to have that conversation per se and say, all right, look, we agree about so much, but we have this one difference and we need to talk about it, because that's not of importance to what we're trying to do. I think what we should be doing is working to create the society in which those religious beliefs don't matter anymore. And we've created a society where they no longer feel the need to hold such a belief, because it's better. They're not a marginalized community, and they feel that they have this one thing that, you know, is greater than all else that they can rely on for strength. So I don't think it's necessarily, you know, going and working with, like, you know, a marginalized community saying, great, we've done all this great work together, please sit down. That's not our place.
Right.
I think it is to work towards that community, towards that society where they don't need it. And some will just not need it on their own and reason themselves out of it. Some will engage in conversation, you know, just like we're having now and we'll have in the future. And they'll hear, oh, wow, I found out you didn't believe in God. Why not? And then you have a conversation naturally. Things like that will happen. I don't think to me, anti-theism isn't about really going into someone's space and saying, all right, we need to talk about this because you need to stop believing in it.
So I guess what you're saying, and this is probably a way of articulating my own position, is that sort of the foundation of where we're at is anti-theist, but that doesn't necessarily that's not necessarily the end all and be all of our priorities. Sometimes there are fights that are bigger than that, and we can switch gears and sort of forget that for a second when we're in certain specific positions. Would that be an accurate way of restating that?
I think so. I think anti-theism is more of a goal, maybe is the best way to say it. Like, it's one of those things that I'm not going to see in my lifetime, is the eradication of religion. I don't think my kids will see it. My kids probably won't see it. But I think if we have this idea that we can better society, even marginally, if fewer people rely on religious belief, and I think we need to start with the hardcore religious beliefs. The fundamentalists in all religions do the most damage, and then we need to look at that point. And that's I think that's where most of us focus our work. We spend most of our time talking about the damage being done by the extremes. And when we do that, we get the more moderates to agree and say, well, they make us look bad. And then as we chip away at that, we then have that opportunity. And like I said in my piece, where I talked about how my humanism requires me to be an anti-theist. And I said, moderate believers don't understand sometimes that their reliance so heavily on faith gives value to the faith of the extremists. And if they start to realize that, and not to say they give up faith, but when they start to realize that, they have to start questioning what role faith plays in their life, and how much reliance should they have on faith. And so I think anti-theism is a great goal, but it's not part of my quote-unquote activism. I'm not screaming, you must stop believing in God now. That's just not a part of what I care about. It's just part of who I am, is that I believe the world is better off without religious belief.
Right. Well, and that's what makes it complicated, because obviously, if we hold those beliefs at some level, we have to act on them, right? But where do we stop? I mean, are we being intellectually dishonest if we don't, go? Because if we say that that moderate religious views give cover to extremist views, and sort of to flesh that out, what's really meant by that is the fact that once we legitimize the idea that faith is a good way to know things, that God told me so as an okay justification, then all bets are off. We can justify pretty much anything, and that's not something that I entirely disagree with. But so do we think that? I mean, if we say that, I think that's, I don't know. I think that's a short step from saying that the differences between the two aren't as relevant. Maybe that's an unfair characterization. But if we really believe that, why are we not going after the moderate religious beliefs, vigorously? Why are we focusing our efforts on other places?
I think it's priority. I think we realize, at least some of us, and I think there are some activists that are very actively going after the moderates. But I think for a lot of us, we are prioritizing what we can do short term versus long term. And to me, I see a more value in helping people's lives today. And so getting the fundamentalists out of politics, getting, holding fundamentalism accountable for terrorism. And I mean that from Islam to Christianity, because they're both conducting it. And that has short-term now effects. I don't think if I spent all my time saying, moderates, you need to give up your faith because you're doing this, while I'm doing that, fundamentalism is only getting stronger and no one's opposing it.
Right. So
it's a priority for me.
So it's kind of like the people who are out fighting the extremists and the fundamentalists are sort of doing like triage or first aid, like we're the EMTs. And then, the people fighting the more baseline fight are the researchers who are like trying to find the cure for the disease. Like, is that an apt metaphor, you think?
I think but I also think that we all straddle that line, because
right.
If I do see moderates doing something that is giving weight or power to the extremists, I'm speaking out and saying, you're responsible for this. You are not, responsible, and I'll put that in air quotes. You hold some level of moral responsibility for not standing up against this, for not, for holding the same beliefs that they're using and then just saying, oh, but they're doing it wrong, or they're not true Christians, they're not true Muslims. We have to attack when necessary, but like I said, we have to then put our focus to where it's at. And a part of being honest is if a Christian asks me, are you against religion? I just say, yes, I am. I would rather you not be a Christian. But I'm very rarely asked that. But I'm honest about it if I do. I don't, oh, no. I'm fine with you believing whatever you want, just so we can work together. I'm completely open and honest about my position. I just prioritize my activism and where I put the limited amount of time I have to fight.
Friends, I've decided that instead of doing commercial break style breaks, that every once in a while, just gonna break into an episode and make some announcements and do some sort of real life news about what we're doing and where we're gonna be. So couple of things. We've probably beat it to death on the show already, but ReasonCon is coming up at the end of April. ReasonNC.org is the place to get tickets. The speaker lineup is going to be fantastic, and I don't just say that because I'm on it. We're going to have lots of cool people there. You can go back and listen to, I think it's episode 5 or 6. That was the ReasonCon wrap-up episode from last time, and about the just amazing experience that I had there, and I don't expect this year to be any less amazing. So if it's possible for you to get there, I would highly recommend going there. It's going to be an amazing time. The other big announcement is that I've been talking about it forever. I'm finally really starting the process for my bottom surgery. And Celeste and I are actually getting it together because it works out better for time off work and that kind of stuff for us to have it close to the same time so we can recover together. We'll have caretakers with us and everything like that. With that obviously comes an enormous financial burden. We've got a little bit in savings. We're going to do a lot of saving on our own. But there's still about a $7,000 gap between what we have / are going to be able to save and what we need. So we have started a fundraiser. I'm not going to beat it to death on the show because that's not what this show is about, but I did want to mention it. It's youcaring.com/Callie and Celeste. Any donation helps, $5, $10, $15, $20, or big donations are great too. And even if you can find the campaign and just share it to spread the word, I would be incredibly grateful, because this is a thing that has been needed for a very long time for both of us. And it looks like it's finally possible. And it's in July. So, time is kind of starting to get short. I know it sounds weird 6 months out, but 6 months is not a lot of time when you got to book plane tickets and a place to stay for over a month and all of that kind of stuff. So if anybody is willing or able to help out, even just by sharing the campaign, that would be greatly appreciated. Definitely want to give a shout out to our patrons. Thank you so much for helping us do what we do, supporting the show financially. Going to the Women's March on Washington this weekend. That would not be possible if it were not for you. And I plan to bring you a great episode of content from that event, so we can kind of get an eye inside and see what's going on and what people are saying there. Big shout out this week to Michael. Thanks for joining the family. We appreciate you and we love you very, very dearly. And with that, let's get back to the show. I'd also like to get your thoughts, both of you, and you too, Ari. One of the arguments that I made in my blog post is, so when I first started getting into movement atheism and actually involved with the atheist community, I think my position was that a world without religion would be far from a perfect world, but it would be a demonstrably better world because of all of the ills that are perpetrated by religion. But the more and more I engage with people, again, this isn't necessarily on movement atheism, because I found most people who are actually movement atheists, who are involved with secular organizations and things like that, most of those people are awesome. But when we talk about sort of the wider community of people, people in Facebook groups and people in comment sections and people on YouTube, especially, Jesus. I think we obviously have to acknowledge that these problems are not unique to religion. So one of the questions that I asked, and again, this is a question, this is not one of those gotcha, like, I'm going to undermine everything that your life is about kind of things. It's a genuine question. Is it worth it to focus on religion when, in my mind, I don't think it's so far out there to say that religion itself may not be a problem, because, I think a lot of this stuff is sort of built into humanity by design, and you're going to find it anywhere. So Are these things worse in religion, or are they exacerbated by religion so much that it makes sense to put our focus there? And this isn't necessarily speaking about our own activism, but just speaking more generally, like for example, American Atheists, their activism is specifically atheist. And of course they do secular things because that goes along with it. But I have to question if that in itself is effort well spent, when, we could 100% reach our goals there and solve very few problems.
I don't know if I agree with that. Well, go ahead, Stehpanie, please.
Oh, yeah. I've written a bit about American Atheists. My first published work appeared in American Atheist magazine. And I think they do cause sometimes more harm to the movement than helping. A few years back, David Silverman made some usually in politic comments, is basically saying anyone who doesn't call themselves an atheist basically he was lumping humanists and free thinkers and skeptics and saying they're liars because they don't call themselves atheists. I've said in my post that I'm all of the above and identify as such. They're distinct. They have distinct characters and meanings, and saying that I'm a humanist is not saying, I can't say I'm an atheist. I'll say I'm a humanist. I think humanism is basically, I've called this the theology of atheism. But I do think that sometimes that they cause more harm to the movement than helping.
Dan?
So, full disclosure, I'm a regular columnist at American Atheist magazine. David Silverman's a wonderful friend of mine. He wrote the foreword to my book, so I'm very on board with American Atheists. But I do think that it's how we have to look at it, and you're right. Like I'm an anti-capitalist because I think capitalism causes a great deal of the problems we face. And so I do, and a lot of us work on different things that are outside of religion that we also feel cause harm. But when it comes to religion, it does that thing, and I wish I could remember who said it, and so I'm just going to paraphrase it, and someone can correct or someone can chime in, is that religion will take a good person and can convince them to do a really bad thing. Like someone that says murder is wrong and then is taught that abortionists or abortion doctors are murderers, then goes and kills an abortion doctor and truly believes they've done a good act. They believe it's a good thing. Now we can argue that they're crazy, that they were unstable, anything like that. We can say there was mental issues, but a lot of times we look back and there's not. They were just told that something horrible was happening and they felt the need to do something about it. And so, when we eradicate, if let's say tomorrow, all of a sudden everyone stopped being religious, terrible things are still going to happen. There's no denying that whatsoever. I mean, terrorism would still exist in the sense that if America keeps bombing other countries, we're still going to incite people to want to fight back. If, not all murderers are religious. not all, rapists, not all, these people hold varying beliefs, so they could still exist. But I think when we remove religion, we remove a lot of motivation that can convince normally good people to do a bad thing in the name of that religion, in the name of their God. And so I think it's an important step. I don't think it's the be all end all. I don't think the day religion is eradicated, we all go, oh, peace on earth. Far from it. But I think that's a piece of the puzzle. And I think I put religion right up there that I put where I hold, capitalism and, imperialism.
That's fair. Another one of the questions that I ask, and again, this is again a genuine question, and I'm freely willing to admit that this may be cognitive bias of some sort, just because of some of the awful experiences that I've had with people, with people saying and believing awful things as atheists. It makes it tough for me to point directly at religion and say that's the problem, or that's a huge part of the problem, and if that goes away, these problems go away. And I'm freely willing to admit that could simply just be cognitive bias on my part, just because of my experiences. But I mean, what you're saying makes sense. I tend to think that religion in itself isn't necessarily the problem, but dogma is, and I think that's sort of a wide umbrella, and that we can say, things like, capitalism and imperialism and religion and those kinds of things. I mean, they do fall under that umbrella because those are all sort of, belief systems and ways of living that are supposed to be sacred and free from questioning in society. But where I was coming from, and this may be a cynical, biased point of view, and I could be completely wrong, was just that I've seen so many awful things, that it makes it really tough for me to believe that, if that makes sense. And I'm 100% willing to admit that may be a bad thing.
I think of it, to get back to the medical metaphors that we were using earlier, I think of religion as kind of a risk factor for these kinds of harmful beliefs. It's not necessarily the only thing that causes it. Think of heart disease, for example. There are tons of different factors that can go into you developing heart disease. Like if you smoke, it raises your risk of heart disease. If you eat a poor diet, then that raises your risk. Genetics, not exercising. Those are all different things that can lead to you developing heart disease. If you get rid of one of those factors, say that the person has a really healthy diet, that lowers their risk of heart disease. And that's not to say that they're never going to get heart disease and they could have terrible habits in these other areas, but it does lower their risk. So I think of religion as being one of those risk factors, and getting rid of religion isn't going to, it's not going to guarantee that they're not going to have any of these harmful beliefs, but it is one important step. And it's not to say that we shouldn't try to get rid of this one risk factor, because there's still a risk that they could still have these harmful, destructive beliefs. It's just, one important step in the process.
Oh, I think that's a brilliant way to put that.
Well, thanks, Callie.
Ari,
right back at you.
So then I guess my question is to continue the metaphor, and I would guess I would know what your answers would be, is that, is it a risk factor in the same way that, there's a correlation between people who eat oranges and cancer? Or, is it a correlation like smoking and heart disease? You know what I mean? So how much of a risk factor is it that it's worth directing a significant portion of our effort to?
I think it's high. I think a lot of the problems we deal with every day, anti-LGBTQ bigotry, really stems, I think, from religion. Even if, let's say, a child growing up doesn't spend that much time in church, chances are their parents coming from a different generation did. And they instill that belief in their child. And if you grow up in a heavily religious area, you also carry that, and you see it in your everyday life. I think a lot of the problems that we deal with, look at every argument against abortion. That, I've met the girl that runs, the secular anti-abortion group, and I'm pretty sure she was about the only one in her group. So the arguments for
so much a group as a person,
as a person, but like even when I was with Penn Jillette and Emery, the comedian, and they were talking to her and asking her questions about, why are you secular and pro-life? And she kept saying arguments that had us all looking at each other, and all of a sudden Penn goes, "Were you Catholic?" And she said, "Yep." And he said, "Oh, I get it. You've never given that up." Like, even though she lost faith, she's not a Catholic anymore. She's an atheist. She never got over that religious teaching that abortion is just murder and terrible. And so she carries that to this day. And I think that a lot of our problems in society have stemmed from that religious belief that this group is a lesser group. This group is a group of sinners. And by eliminating that belief system, that's going to, I think, on its own, in a sense, start to phase itself out. Now, of course, we have to educate, we have to be proactive. But if people are stopped being told that, being a homosexual is a sin, people stop believing that. But we have one major force in this country repeating that mantra over and over and over and over and over.
So the argument is basically that even if we look at and say, like people who are non-religious, who hold those views, a lot of times you can make the argument that it's sort of a holdover from their religious point of view, as opposed to something that they would have come to had that influence not existed in the first place.
Yeah, but also, even if they were never religious, I think society itself is right. Built into that. So I think our society is ingrained with so many of those religious values that many of us don't even hold. So even if a person was like, "Oh, I was never raised in church," chances are they were raised in the same society as the rest of us, or depending on different parts of this country, even more, right-wing, more fundamentalists, that they're inundated with that thought process. So I think it's part religion, part society, but I think if religion stopped having an influence on society, that problem would, to a degree, I can't say 100%, but to a degree, it would work itself out.
I think that makes sense.
And then we just have your everyday bigots and assholes that
right.
just hate everybody.
Yeah, I argued in another related post to the other part of and subsequent posts that Martin wrote about his atheistic prayers, that it was there was some part of the religion that he grew up in that's still in there, that's making him, even though he was not, I don't quite understand it, but he was praying to an atheistic, godlike construct, I don't know, but he needed it emotionally for about a week, and it was through a tough time. But it's something I've never had a need for, and he has the religion still live in him, even though he is an atheist blogger.
I think the question that we're kind of dancing around is how much of these things are built into human beings by design, and how much of those things are taught to us and taught to us by cultural influence. Because, I've heard people make the argument, and I'm not an evolutionary biologist, so I could be wrong, but it makes sense to me, that the sort of othering and bigotry, it stems from a time when, in our evolutionary history, where, oh my gosh, something is coming at me, I have to make the decision, I have no idea what's going on, but I have to make the decision how to deal with this thing, because if I do the wrong thing, I might die. And obviously for most of human history, that was true. The grass is rustling. I have to assume that thing is hostile to me. And so that sort of instinct is kind of left over from that. And, and again, that might be crap. It makes sense to me, though. So it's
well established, I think.
Yeah,
it's pretty well established. I'm almost complete, other than dropping out to write a book, a biological evolutionary or evolutionary anthropology degree. So yes, you are actually right that that's sort of ingrained in us. So yeah, no, I would say continue because you're on the right track.
Right. So then, yeah, I guess the question that and at this point, I think we've probably beat it to death. But again, the question becomes, so how much of it is innate and how much of it is culturally influenced? And I guess, I don't know. I guess the answer to that question may not even necessarily matter because I think we fight it the same way. Whether it's instinct or whether it's something that's taught to us, because something that's taught to us enough probably becomes something like instinct. So I guess after going through that entire thought experiment, I guess I'm not sure that the answer to that matters so much. Dan, what do you think?
Well, I think like we were talking about, there is an ingrained thought process to believe in things that aren't there. So, like you said, rustling in the bush. I think certain levels of that are ingrained, but I don't think, oh, hey, LGBTQ people are evil and they're the cause of tornadoes is ingrained in us. Right. That's taught. That's built out of bigotry and dogma. So I think to a degree, start from scratch. I think a form of religion would come into being again.
Right.
But I don't think that necessarily the bigotry and hatred that comes with it would. I think that to a degree just depends. It's the othering. It's the in-group, out-group. And I think that it just depends on the situation. But I think religion has found a way to harness in-group, out-group and make it profitable, but also just make it as evil as it is.
Well, we're about at time here, so I definitely want to give you both the opportunity to plug whatever you want to plug. Stehpanie, do you want to tell us where we can find more about you and find your blog and all that fun stuff? I
blog as Miracle Girl on Patheos. You can look me up on Facebook as Patheos Miracle Girl, on Twitter as Miracle Girl Blog. And my brain is jello because it's morning.
You're fine. And Dan, why don't you tell us where we can find more about you, find your blog, and all that fun stuff?
All right. Well, you can find my blog and my podcast, both called Danthropology, by going to danthropology.com, a website I have spent 4.5 years trying to acquire and finally own. So
go to the website because there's a lot.
I'm very excited to say it. Follow me on Twitter at Dan Arel. That's a great place to interact with me. I'm way more active on there than I probably should be. And then please head to Amazon and pick up one of my 2 books, The Secular Activist, with the foreword written by David Silverman, in which I encourage everyone to become political, secular activists in general. And I give you some tips that I think will help you along the way. And if you're a parent, know a parent, want to be a parent, pick up my first book, Parenting Without God.
Awesome. Well, that is going to do it, my friends, for this episode of the Atheist Manifesto. Again, I want to thank my guests for their time and for their insight. I think this was a great conversation. You can find the show on Facebook at facebook.com/thegatheistmanifesto. You can email us at thegatheistmanifesto@gmail.com. I'm on Twitter at GatheistCali, and you can find the show on Twitter at TheGatheists. And
it's time for another episode of Did You Know Podcasting.
Oh, God.
Did you know the Scathing Atheists recently changed their theme music, but there's more to the story than you might be aware of. Puzzle in a Thunderstorm LLC was actually facing a plagiarism lawsuit from the estate of the late jazz blues artist B.B. King. As part of the settlement, they agreed to change the theme's arrangement so it less resembled King's style and more resembled an Eagles cover band whose guitarist got food poisoning right before a gig, and the only person they could find to step in was the steel guitarist from the line dancing place off the highway. Did you know Dogma Debate's David Smalley used to have very different career aspirations? You may know that he worked in IT before he built his podcasting and audiobook empire, but Smalley also had dreams of making it big in the film industry. Remember the 1990 cult classic Troll 2? He was in it. If you look carefully during the scene where the goblins eat the protagonist's mother, you can see him off to the left munching on her plantified remains. Unfortunately, Smalley soon found himself out of work when CGI monsters began to replace human actors in costumes. He turned to podcasting as a new means of making a living, and the rest is history. Did you know the SJW Circle Jerk contains hidden messages? If you reverse the audio during the skit in episode 13, you'll hear Jeremiah espousing allegiance to the dark forces of the Supreme Overlord who presides in all of our hearts with malice and vitriol. There are tons of cool Easter eggs in this podcast, especially references to the developers' increasing disillusionment with existence in our Western understanding of linear time and entropy's inescapable march toward ultimate destruction. Happy hunting! Well, that's it for this week's Did You Know podcasting. For more, visit us on Facebook at Ari Stillman or email us at aristillman4@gmail.com. And don't forget to like and subscribe.
And they all hate us now. If you want to support the show, you can go to patreon.com/thegaytheist manifesto and make a per episode donation to support the show and the activism we do. If that's not doable, you can always head over to iTunes and give us a 5-star review. That helps us get heard by more people. Before we go, I want you to know that if you're lost, you're hurting, you're scared, if you feel like no one cares and no one understands, you need to know there's a community out here that loves you, cares for you, knows that you're capable of amazing things and that you are worthy of love. If you're struggling, please don't be afraid to reach out. Until next time, friends, this is the Gaytheist Manifesto.